Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Lucy Tomasini. I'm a project manager with the Grower Group Alliance and the Southwest WA Drought Resilience Adoption and Innovation Hub, which is quite a mouthful, and so we more easily know it as the Southwest WA Drought Hub. So welcome to our fourth iteration of the Building Resilient Farming Systems webinar series, where we'll be highlighting 6 projects in our transformational program. This webinar today is brought to you by the Southwest WA Drought Hub, which is led by the Grower Group Alliance. So as a very quick introduction to the Hub before we get started and what we do, who we are. So the Hub has been around since 2021 and is part of 8 hubs nationally, funded through the Australian Government's Future Drought Fund. The aim of these hubs is to provide regionally relevant information and support to help farmers and regional communities prepare for and adapt to the impacts of drier, warmer seasons. So our focus is really on collaboration in the agricultural ecosystem, bringing together researchers, agribusiness, farmers, industry leaders, government, and so forth to make sure that agricultural research is impactful, accessible, and drives innovation. So through funding from the Future Drought Fund, we sought project EOIs from our Hub consortium partners that would investigate concepts that contribute to evolving agricultural systems in Western Australian agriculture. So each of these projects is led by a Hub consortium partner and delivered in collaboration with growers, grower groups, industry experts, regional organizations to help ensure that the work is really practical and relevant and grounded in real-world farming contexts. So the primary focus of these projects, whilst it's on generating new knowledge, tools, and approaches, some innovations may, over time, contribute to broader shifts in how agricultural systems operate and build resilience at multiple levels. So today we'll be exploring a research project which was led by the University of Western Australia that examined the barriers and opportunities for agricultural natural capital to function as an asset class. So this project focused on natural capital production landscapes and explored how growers, Aboriginal corporations, investors, and regional organizations can be better aligned to enable place-based natural capital outcomes that support long-term farm resilience. So today we'll be hearing from Ram Pandit from UWA and Tom Picton-Warlow from Mobile Global. Just a few things before I pass over to Tom. This session today will be recorded and it will be put up on our webpage sometime next week, so you can rewatch it or share it with your networks. Please remember to keep yourself on mute, but feel free to put your camera on or off. At the end of the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, I'll ask you to put your hand up at the end, or I can ask them for you if you just pop them into the Q&A tab at the top. I think that's all from me. And so without further ado, Tom.
Thanks, Lucy. So what we're presenting today is the result of an 18-month project, a research project conducted with input from 38 investors across a wide range of different investment groups, including asset management, retail banks, investment banks, insurers, superannuation and venture capital. It's given us insights into what investors think of natural capital production landscapes. In addition, we surveyed 70 growers and pastoralists across Western Australia, with an even spread of pastoralist, livestock, mixed farming and grains. This project represents an exploration of opportunities and challenges, and our goal today is to share our findings with you. So we'd like to thank the survey participants, the partner institutions, UWA and EDU, and funding and support from FDF, Grower Group Alliance, and as Lucy mentioned, the Southwest WA Drought Resilience Adoption and Innovation Hub. So natural capital refers to the stock of renewable and non-renewable natural resources that are used by economic units, including flows of non-renewable resources as well as ecosystem services. So it includes plants, animals, air, water, energy, soils and minerals that provide benefits to people and are used by industries, households and governments. When you look at natural capital, you can look at some definitions. So the natural capital production landscape refers to a large area, so it's a regional scale that integrates primary production such as farming, pastoral, forestry and fisheries with the sustainable management of nature. You have natural asset companies that refer to companies that are based on natural capital and use natural capital accounting to define and describe their achievements. And asset classes are groups of financial instruments that have similar financial characteristics and behave similarly in the marketplace and are subject to the same laws and regulations. So what does that all mean for us? Well, imagine a farm with plentiful water in the soil and landscape, additional diversified income and reduced risk. So I think that's quite a good value proposition to explore. When we look at natural capital production landscapes, you can see that there is, as defined by the Common International Classification of Ecosystem Services, which is also incidentally used by the Australian Bureau of Statistics, there's ecosystem services that can be split into a number of different compartments or types. So these categorisations are provisioning, regulating and cultural services with further subdivisions to ensure consistency and usability for ecological and economic assessments. So in provisioning, you have such things as biomass, water. In regulating and maintaining services, you have air quality and climate regulation, water flow regulation, erosion prevention and soil fertility, pest and disease regulation and pollination. And in cultural services, you have recreation and ecotourism, aesthetic and inspirational services and educational value. So you can see within the provisioning services, just taking that as an example, you can see that it's a real tangible thing. So you've got energy, you've got water resources in the picture there, you've got soil. Soils are interesting in that they're probably a bit of an abiotic and biotic combination, if you like, of living and non-living elements. And then bush things like bush foods, crops, livestock, and through to carbon sequestration. So it's a whole raft of things that, from an investor perspective, are quite common that they invest in. Such things as water, energy, land, and agriculture are common investment types, but they also can be defined as we see here within a provisioning service. So when we look at provisioning services, you can see that if you add natural capital, which include all these things, plus agriculture, you can actually reduce your risk and have diversified returns, which in turn reduces your variability and variance as a practicing agricultural grower. So investors see potential, but what we've found in our project is that the investment case is not yet proven. They're looking for tangibility, as we're seeing in that picture, tangible things. So in many ways, it's an education for them about, oh, okay, well, that's what natural capital is. It's a cash flow. To them, it needs cash flow, stable returns, pilot projects, which actually show in a tangible way how this thing works. So to that extent, natural capital is an emerging investment opportunity that requires demonstration models, if you like. And that being said, investors do like landscape thinking. So natural capital accounting. So as much as you have an investor interested and a grower interested, you need a method to systematically measure and report on these natural capital resources, their extent, quality, types, and amount of, and value of the benefits. So this is where the measurement of the stocks and flows, the ecosystem services that I've described, need to align with a common framework, such as the UN System of Environmental Economic Accounting, or SEA, which is the most commonly used and common in the global sense internationally. So that is a very important method that is used commonly throughout natural capital. What I'll do is hand over to Ram, if Ram wants to take control, and Ram will go into the research and outcomes that we found and insights from the project. Over to Ram.
Okay, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Lucy. Before I begin, I'd like to pay my respect to elders past and present, all the traditional owners of the land from where we are meeting today. So I would like to pay that respect to the Aboriginal communities and their caring of the land for generations. So the question we are exploring, as Tom alluded, is to think through natural capital as we defined. What is the sort of understanding of growers in terms of engaging in natural capital as an asset class going forward, given what do they do in their farm, as well as what is the perception of the investors, or what the investors want, or in what way they would like to engage in natural capital production in farming context. So we see it as a two-side issue. One is the demand side, that is the investors are demanding natural capital products for a variety of purposes, and the growers are the suppliers in that respect. They supply those natural capital related products, ecosystem services of different types for a variety of reasons, including profitability and other economic returns. So what we try to do in this project is to understand the grower's perspective in terms of what do they see as barriers and opportunities in managing natural capital within the agricultural systems as an investable asset, as well as to explore investors' appetite in investing in the natural capital within the large scale, which is a regional scale. In the terms we have used in this presentation is natural capital production landscape. So what I'll do next is to share with you what we found from our research, and I'll take you through some of the key findings. Basically, the project is started almost 18 months ago. As Tom alluded, we have used mixed method approach, the quantitative approach of looking at the derived information from surveys, as well as qualitative methods. Our sample includes landholders, growers, particularly from WA context. So the project was focused in WA, and investors, they come from nationally and to some extent internationally. They are also, even if they are looking at abroad or from international perspective, they are looking at WA landscape from investment perspective. So we have done that sort of surveys of two groups of the demand and supply sides here. We collected data by using many different ways, one-to-one meetings and focus group discussion with investors, workshop presentations with growers and landowners or pastoralists within WA in different occasions. And then finally, we conducted two kind of surveys, one targeted to growers and another targeted to investors. Then we explored the information that we derived using exploratory statistical analysis, which I'm going to present briefly. And we also introduced an idea of structural equation modeling, because the information we derived from surveys are pretty much perception based. And how do we come together to think through the viability of the natural capital production landscape or creating natural capital as an asset class? When we bring these two different type of responses together, we adopted the theory of what we call theory of planned behavior coming from psychology. So we have used that tool in order to answer some of the questions. So as I alluded, so we have done the exploratory analysis where we look at the supply side in one end and the demand side on the other end. in order to flourish the natural capital market, these two sides have to align together. If not, then that means if we want to pursue in this journey or promote natural capital, then we have to align them through policy, awareness raising, or whatever the other policy instruments that we may need to bring in. So the first bit is exploratory thinking around what we received from those surveys. The second, as I alluded, the structural equation modeling, which is looking at the growers. We have 70 observations from different type of growers, and then 38 observations from different types of investors. So grower sample was sufficient enough to apply to this quantitative way of thinking about how their perception translates into attitude in order to adapt natural capital practices in their farms and the surrounding environment. So from investors' perspective, what type of natural capital practices are they more willing to invest in? So we'll show you some of that result as we go through. So that's the framework which we use to analyze the information. Very quickly about the number of respondents, which we already know. It's a mix of different type of grower community from WA, predominantly you can say in our language, we have framed it as crop, oilseed, pulse growers or traders, and the livestock growers and livestock pastoralists or livestock traders and so forth. So there are 56 of them who have picked up the different type of trade they are involved in, because no one is solely one. There are only few farmers who have indicated they are only doing one thing, but they have picked up multiple type of practices. So 56 observations are there to look at the left side of the graph, and then 38 investors coming from different type of investment environment, as Tom alluded. So what do we found when you look at the data? Of course, out of those 56, out of 70, 56 have indicated they have been involved in one or more than one of the agricultural enterprise. So in that, you'll see on the left side of the graph, number of sectors involvement. There are 8 different sectors altogether. Some respondents involved in 8 of those different sectors, the crops, pulse, oilseed, forestry, livestock, meat, wool, all these different type of things. There are only 2 observations of like that, and then almost 12 of the respondents are involved in only one of those multiple sectors. If you look at that in terms of the heat map, which is the right side here, it shows the sector co-occurrence among the respondents. And this is primarily based on the growers' responses. So we see 2 types of hotspots here: grain, oilseed, pulse, and then livestock, meat, wool. And those are the 2 hotspots where we see many of the respondents coming from. So what we learned from that responses, if you think about the likelihood of adopting natural capital practices, in the y-axis, we have different type of natural capital practices that we asked respondent to consider: healthy soils, renewable energy, renewable power, aggregated biodiversity and carbon credits, rehabilitation of water systems, biodiversity corridor, integrating natural capital projects in current farming practices. So you see in the bracket, those are the number of responses we received. Those bars indicate a Likert scale, which means some of these practices are very likely. That's how respondents, growers responded. And for some of the practices, or some of the respondents indicated they are very unlikely to adopt those practices. So for the most part, if you look at these bars, color-coded bar, so very likely and likely indicates predominantly in all of the sectors. Those 2 bars indicates they are very likely or highly likely, except the fact that integrating natural capital projects in current farming practices has a neutral response, a proportionately high neutral response compared to the others. So there is that sort of inclination towards adopting these practices. Then we looked at it a bit more closely to see how these things are aligning. when I say aligning, what I mean by that is we looked at 3 specific hypotheses to test based on growers' response. The first one is about whatever the knowledge they already have and their willingness to adopt natural capital adoption practices. We have a range of questions indicating the knowledge, whether they have that knowledge or not, and their willingness to adapt these particular natural capital practices and so forth. So the first hypothesis is about looking at given the knowledge, how likely they are willing to adopt natural capital practices. Similarly, they have highlighted certain risk in adopting natural capital practices. So given the risk they perceived, how likely or not they are willing to adopt natural capital practices in their farm business and so forth. Similarly, given the benefits they have recognized from natural capital, how likely or not. It's a common sense in some sense. If they perceive it as a risky adventure, they are less likely to adopt them, which is negative and significant. Means those respondents who perceive high risk in this these practices, they are less likely to adopt. If they know more about this, if they have full knowledge of these practices, they are highly likely to adopt. In the same way, if they perceive benefits directly coming from natural capital practices adoption in their farm, they are highly likely to adopt. So that's the overarching sort of a summary we got from growers' responses. If we break down it into 2 types of growers, I have a caveat here to say that even if I say 2 types, predominantly grain, cereals, and pulse growers, that's the gray boxes or gray color represents the group that are primarily grain, cereals, and pulse growers and traders, and the rest is livestock and others. So we had predominantly 2 groups, but there are some other mixes as well. So they all adopt these 3 types of practices. For example, grain, oil seeds, pulses. So when you look at it across those 3 domains, benefits and adoption, risk and adoption, and then knowledge and adoption, there is not much of a variation between the growers if we think from knowledge and benefit point of view. But when it comes to the risk, there is quite a difference when we consider risk and adoption. Particularly, the grain, oilseed, and pulse growers are relatively more risk averse compared to the livestock and others. So that's what we see here. And if we want to know exactly in which aspect of the risk component they are, they differ between the 2. Here are these individual, there are 4 different risk components we have asked growers to consider. Level of risk involved in natural capital projects, risk of listing natural capital as an asset class, investment risk, and natural capital as a competing interest for your businesses. So when we see in that way, we see two types of response. In one sort of risk, these livestock and other type of growers or practitioners are more risk averse. But if we look at some other form of 2 of those risks, we see the grains, cereals, and pulse growers are more risk averse. So that's why this risk component is differentiated between the type of growers, but perception of risk of adopting these practices and that adoption differs between these 2 categories. Otherwise, it's the same. In terms of knowledge, in terms of benefit, there is not much of a variation we see between those 2 groups. So now let me go quickly to talk about investors' perspective. So natural capital as a valuable asset within equity structure. So most of the investors agree on that, or highly or strongly agree. Engaging with natural capital components, similar to the growers' response. These are different type of natural capital components or practices we have asked them. So what we see is very likely and highly likely. Those bars are all for all of these natural capital components. We see they are above or close to 30, except for renewable energy. That's where we see many of the investors are relatively neutral compared to the other type of ranking they have given in the Likert scale. So in a general sense, there is a broad appetite for investors to engage in natural capital practices or investing in natural capital. What are the key concerns they have? well, we see they do have concerns. The investors also have concerns similar to the risk that we showed earlier for the growers. Growers perceive those type of risk in adopting that. Similarly, we don't have a quantitative analysis of the investors' information because the sample size was fairly limited, just about 38. So what we see is lack of tangible and profitable natural capital project examples is one of the concern or barriers for them to come on board immediately. They are considering, but that is one of the key barriers or concern they have. Similarly, we can see market risk as well as the lack of liquidity are prominently featuring as concerns or barriers. If we look at the opportunities, where do they see opportunities from investors' perspective? We see positive environmental and biodiversity outcomes appears to be quite high. They see an opportunity over there by investing in natural capital projects. Similarly, long-term growth potential, they observe it. There is a long-term growth potential by investing in natural capital, and similarly, cultural and social outcomes. Of course, the other in other respect, like sustainable returns, as well as we can look at revenue diversification, are also quite significant. But what we see primarily, they are seeing opportunities in this space is positive environmental and biodiversity outcomes and long-term growth potential, as well as cultural and social outcomes. So with that, that's what we found. We are in the process of finalizing within a week or so, finalizing the full report, and which will be shared to the Grower Group Alliance for those of you who are interested to look at it in detail. Here are our key points. There are structural barriers and emerging opportunities to consider natural capital as an asset class. Based on the survey of both growers and investors, that's how we found. Natural capital knowledge and benefit positively affect the likelihood of natural capital practices adoption among growers, while natural capital associated risk hinder the likelihood of such adoption. Common sense, but it appeared strongly. Among growers, perceived risk differ mainly between grain, oilseed, and pulse producers and others, particularly within the risk category. That's what we see. Investors indicated a high likelihood of engaging in healthy soils, rehabilitation of water, biodiversity corridors, and biodiversity carbon credits, but they consider lack of good examples, market risk, and lack of liquidity as perceived barriers at this stage. Investors note the potential natural capital investment from long-term growth, environmental, social, and cultural outcome perspective. So there are opportunities in that space from investor side. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for being part of this webinar, and my acknowledgement to survey participants, partner institutions, funders, and everyone who is joining today to listen to it and inquire us about it. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Ram and Tom. That was really great job at synthesizing such a complex and massive body of work. So thank you very much for that. We're going to head into the Q&A section now. So if anyone has a question, please pop your hand up and you can ask it yourself, or you can just put it into the Q&A tab at the top. So I'll start us off with a question that we received online from someone, which was, what is the best strategy for growers to scale up natural capital opportunities in broadacre systems? So not sure who would like to take that, Tom or Ram.
Tom, do you want to go first?
You go, Ram. Sorry.
Broadacre. I think if I have to narrow it down to a broadacre alone, I think that's a little bit tricky because we have not answered the question in that way, particularly differentiating for broadacre versus the others. But in general, I think our finding relates to where do they see the alignment between the growers and the investors, irrespective of the landscape. For example, what we see, there is quite a bit of alignment in certain aspects of the natural capital component. I think that's the area where we would like to go first, which are already aligned between growers and the investors. Where those areas are not aligned at this stage, that gives us, whether it is particularly associated with broadacre farming or in other type of farming context, then there is room to work in terms of perhaps how do we align them through education, extension, or whatever policy incentive or something like that. Sorry, I can't be very specific to broadacre alone, but it's a little bit generic. But the starting point is where these things are aligning, irrespective of the type of farming context, we should perhaps start from there first.
Yeah, I think there's also a historical precedent with land care as well. If you look at that, there was some broadacre systems engagement there. And it's really about what we're exploring, but as Ram said, not specifically broadacre alone, but broadacre was part of it. But it's really to look at how to aggregate outcomes across regions, looking at soil health, biodiversity, water management, which is all critical in the broadacre environment. So it's that theme of collaboration, and then measuring, how we would potentially measure that using the frameworks and methodologies that we've talked about, and then what sort of investment structures might be possible with regards to regional projects, grower groups, and the like. So that's I suppose a high level answer to that question.
Thanks, Tom and Ram. We have a question in the Q&A tab from Ellen Smith. Not sure if you'd like to ask it yourself, but Ellen's asking if we can expand on the investors' perceived structural barriers. So is that a reference to current state/federal policy and regulatory settings or something else?
Well, thank you. That's a very good question in one hand, and the challenging one to give a thorough answer to that. But I will refer to some of the observations we got from investors. What investors indicated in the survey, as well as in our conversation through focus group discussion and meetings, are the following. They see that policy certainty is something they would like to have in order to jump on board. So it means giving policy certainty for them to engage in natural capital investment appears to be the critical thing from their side. That is the one bit, which is a policy, regulatory, we can think of all of those are part of it. They want to see policy certainty from the government or agencies to engage fully in this space. The second, what they said is perhaps it's more about the practical side of things rather than the policy, which is the good examples of those investment cases that gives them confidence. So they are watching out there and trying to see in how and in what context they would like to invest in. But that willingness appears to be quite strong. But those are a couple of things we observed.
Great, thank you, Ram. We've got a question, sorry I couldn't see the earlier questions, from Karen. Do you know if any other states are doing similar research? She's based in New South Wales in a land care organisation.
I think this is more on the social science side of the work we did, which is about understanding barriers and opportunities from growers and investors' perspective. So we haven't done any field trials or looking at the actual cases. But what I know from the literature as well as a conversation with others, there are other groups, they are implementing some of these practices in the field and trying to measure these both in WA itself as well as nationally. If I may need to name one, maybe there is a little bit more from economic focus. The Farming for the Future has initiated this sort of things. There are others too who are engaged in this space nationally. So maybe in New South Wales, there might be Farming for the Future might be working in that, but more from economic angle to think the valuing the nature in the farming context more so than understanding what we shared is more about the perception of the growers as well as the investors to engage in that space. So yes, there are.
Yeah. It's also worth mentioning, organisations like Go.Farm, Nuveen, New Forests, and Pollination, for instance, they're all active organisations in this space. Impact Seed, there's quite a few of them that are actually out there and using natural capital in a investment sense. So that's worth noting as well.
Great, thank you both. Franco is asking, you mentioned that grain and oilseed producers tend to be more risk averse when adopting natural capital practices. Could you elaborate on the specific risks that would drive this hesitation?
Okay, so this is specific to this particular analysis where we see that if we look at the risk components, what we have, and I can elaborate a little bit outside the quantitative approach we have taken. We have 4 different components within the risk statements, 4 statements. One is level of risk involved in natural capital projects. How do you view that? And do you see it's a highly risky venture, whether they highly likely to accept that statement or not? That's how we modeled. What we see here, the dark one is indicating livestock and others, and the light one is indicating the grains, oilseed, and pulse growers. So if we see this natural capital competing interest of your business, that's where they see it competes with their ongoing business. If it competes with their ongoing business, they are not very much likely to adopt it. So that's the reason why they think they are trying to be risk averse. The other component in a relative term is the level of risk. Level of risk involved in natural capital project. They see a little bit more risk involved in natural capital projects relative to the livestock and the others. So those are the 2 components. That's what we see. One, if it competes with their regular business, then they are not likely. They consider it as a highly risky venture. Another is level of risk involved in those projects. They perceive there is a higher risk in going through natural capital projects compared to the rest. The reason perhaps is compared to the livestock or the others, grain growers have perhaps a limited sort of window of changing their practice, or if something happens, they have a limited time to adjust that. And for example, if environment turns to be very negative, then the livestock traders or the ranchers might be able to liquidate their asset in a relatively easier sense compared to the growers. Possibly, those are some of the concerns they might have perceived in indicating that. In our quantitative way of thinking, it is about if it competes with their ongoing business, they perceive it risky.
Great, thank you very much, Ram. All right, we've got time for maybe 1 more, maybe 2 more questions. Alex is asking, because you mentioned about the need for future pilot studies.
If you have any suggestion on who else may benefit from us sending them.
Yep. Sorry, was that Alex asking the question? Or someone who's not on mute, sorry. Asking what would be the size of the project that investors would like to see?
Okay. Even though this is a conversation rather than the specific answer emerging from the research, what we noted from the discussion is they're not interested to act on a one or small scale project. The investors are looking for good examples working at a broader scale. So that's how we see, based on some of the conversation we have had with the investors. Having said that, size is perhaps a relative term depending on which particular investors or what type of investment portfolio they have and how do they go. For example, Go Farms, if they are working with them, if they are engaging in a particular at the farm level perhaps, and if we go to some other big investors, they would like to see a bigger scale project in order to invest in those areas. So it's a relative. I think there are sort of a gradation in the investors as well as on the grower side. We found a mixed sort of response. Some are interested at a farm level, and some are looking at a broader level whole landscape.
Yeah, and often it's quite structured. So within, say, a pension or a superannuation fund, they'll tend to have a certain size of investment that they'll be interested in, but anything below that, they're not going to be. It's not worth their while, you know, to then administer and manage it. So it really depends on the investor, the type of investor, who is allocating the capital and for what purpose. So there's different within a range of or a spectrum of investors. There's going to be different treatments of risk, and scale is one of those. So it's a whole area in itself, and certainly I think it requires more investigation. But you can certainly get a sense that it does depend on the investor, what their purpose is, what their objectives are, what their allocation of funding is likely to be, and what that makes them prepared to invest or not.
But having said that, that's true, Tom. But what we also noted is investors are willing to jump on. You can find the appropriate or relevant investors given your inclination to engage in this business, whether it is at a big paddock level or beyond. So I think we saw that gradation within the investor community. Some are there, but some clearly, you are right, they don't want to invest below a certain threshold, or even they are quite risk averse and they are waiting and see whether they would like to invest in this sort of enterprise or not. Yep, that's true.
Yeah, so maybe in answer to the question, it would be good to have a range of tangible projects of different scales to illustrate the way they function and what they produce and what sort of products and returns they provide and what risks they have and what resilience they also enable by adopting natural capital, because that's a big question that the investors are thinking, you know, why, if we invest in this, why is it any different to anyone else? You know, what's so special about a natural capital production landscape as opposed to anything else?
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Amber, you have a question and you've also made a comment. Not sure if you'd like to ask it yourself. Amber is here. So Amber is asking, are there any case studies or examples of how natural capital practices could work for farm business and the associated investors?
Well, I think we didn't look at that, as I said, but there are case studies, even within WA context. Different investors are engaging with different type of NRM organizations or grower groups and they have done the piloting. So there are examples. But it is not what we did. But we can cite you or refer you to some of those examples others have done, and there are examples from many parts of Australia.
Yep,
that'll be great.
Great. All right, last question. All we have time for. Amanda's asking, is there a list of approved service providers?
Perhaps the question is a list of approved service providers to support natural capital investment, or the service provider means the intermediary? Is that what the question is?
Amanda, would you like to clarify?
Yeah, more so service providers to help with the benchmarking. And, you know, there's so many out there. How do we, I live in Queensland and I'm working very much in the education space for producers and helping them understand carbon instead of being scared of carbon. So yeah, how do we support the producers that want to go ahead with these projects but don't know who to use and how reliable?
So whilst we're not carbon focused in what we're looking at, one thing we could potentially mention is something like Accounting for Nature, which has an accreditation program, and it also has a independent verification as part of its process. So that's just one example of a framework that you can use, and that provides an environmental condition on a certain methodology that's then assessed independently. That's one example. We could provide you some information around that. But if your question specifically around carbon, then it's a bit beyond that probably. I don't know if that's answering your question though.
Yeah. I think we can't definitely say about we can give that list or something. We didn't look at that, but Tom, you're right. There are those sort of intermediary organizations providing the services, and I think it is something that if how credible services they are receiving, and if you have to pick where to go, that's a very practical question. I'm sorry, we can't answer that question directly, but perhaps there are some examples we can put you in the right direction and you can explore, like Tom said. If that is fine, we can give you some examples what we think, but without indicating the quality and the rigor and all those things. That is not what we looked at, and even we touched on that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Oh, Franco, last question. With so much interest.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucy. Just a quick one. So you did mention that scale, it can be probably one of the walls that can diverge in investment for natural capital. Is there like a relationship in the type of investment and the scale of the investors? For instance, if you don't know, the bigger the scale, the less likely to go into soil health or specific, rehabilitation of fire corridors. If there's anything like it that you can just give us a little bit of insight?
That's a really important question in terms of prioritizing. If I'm how investors are thinking, specializing in some sense, investment and specialization of the services. That's your question, I believe. I'm afraid we have any insight to share on that based on what we looked at. But maybe, Tom, do you have observations which, based on our discussion with investors or with growers, any observations you want to make? But certainly we did not look at that question, but that's a very pertinent question to think through for the next. I appreciate the question very much.
Well, I suppose from an investor's perspective, if you can invest in something that then makes a difference for water systems or soil health that builds resilience in a production environment, then that's something that's going to be of interest to them. So they're looking to make an impact when they invest. So that often is on a scale that is going to be meaningful and provide meaningful outcomes. And so it could, I mean, the soils came through as being very important. For instance, the insurers were very, just to give you that example, were very interested in the importance of soils. They understand that. But the problem with the insurers is that they haven't got a history to then be able to ride against. So it's, in many ways, that underlies what we're facing here with natural capital, is that it's a relatively new thing. So these organisations have to build up the confidence and the understanding to be able to then provide the products. And then what they're looking for, though, is definitely to make an impact and get some sort of return when they invest.
Great.
Thanks, Ram and Tom.
Thank you very much for all your great questions. There's lots of interest, obviously, in this space. Thank you, Tom and Ram, for your presentations and for answering those questions. That was super insightful. As Ram mentioned, they're finalizing project analyses, and these will be available on our project web pages soon. So keep an eye out for those. Just wanted to thank you all for coming to this session today. There's a QR code there if you'd like to learn more about the project, and keep in touch. I'm sure Ram and Tom will be happy to take any more questions if you reach out to them. Their contact details can be found on the webpage. We are running another one of these sessions in a fortnight on Aboriginal agricultural methods, project led by ECU and Maman Marabujar. So make sure to come to that if you're interested. Thank you all for joining.